Welcome to the Next Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I'm going to do a bonus episode to share my thoughts and insights on things I am seeing in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world. Together, I will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. I share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do this alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So, no guest expert this week. We wanted to drop some bonus episodes based on key questions we're getting asked by the diversity, equity, and inclusion community. And by community, I mean friends, colleagues, clients, everyone that I have known in my professional and personal experiences seem to be asking, what can I do to show up? What can I do to be supportive? If I am in a corporate America role especially, what does this mean for us if historically we haven't done such a hot job of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And when we look up at the top of our organization, perhaps we're a little male, a little pale, and maybe even a little stale. And if that's you, you're not alone. Organizations, in fact, the S&P 500 is 92% are led by white males, presumably straight, able-bodied, cisgender as well, but we don't know all of those things. Those are not quantified, but I think we can make an assumption that the majority fit into the majority group by all of those dimensions. And what we know about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that we don't get the most from the team when we're not mirroring who we want to do business with, when we're not reflecting the values of the communities that we serve. And so this is a great chance to bring in our white male friends as allies and to have a robust discussion about it. So that's where we're at. And those are the questions I'm hearing. One question in particular that has been very, very timely in the wake of George Floyd and the summer's events and the continued conversation on anti-racism has been organizations approaching me and saying, okay, time out. We know that we need to think about this more strategically. Okay. So maybe we haven't given a lot of thought to our diversity and inclusion strategy or equity strategy or whatever wrapper, whatever words they're using around it. And I traditionally have not done this work, and so I was a little perplexed by this when I heard this question, and then get my ally radar up, and I heard it 3-4 times in June, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do some research on this and figure it out. Luckily, I have a strategy background. I did strategy work for 4 years and got my MBA in marketing strategy. So I do know enough to be dangerous about strategy. And I thought, this isn't something I've traditionally done with clients before, full transparency. But perhaps this is a problem I can help solve. So since June, I've had the chance to work with 5, 6, close to 10 clients in some capacity around diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, and have had a chance to host a series of workshops on the topic. So I wanted to take an opportunity in this bonus podcast episode to share, if you're on the journey to defining your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, what could that look like for you? Good news is it's simple. I'm not going to tell you to create a 20-page document. You know those things don't work. But I am going to say it's simple but complex at the same time. So it's an iterative conversation, just like most strategy conversations need to be. But there's essentially 3 key questions I ask my clients that are wrestling with what they want their DEI strategy to be. And the first one is, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to us? Okay, so I like to put this up in a Zoom call, as we're living in a virtual world right now. It would be great in a real life setting to flip chart this out, whiteboard this out. I love Post-it notes for these types of exercises. Assuming you are in a virtual environment, a Zoom whiteboard will do. And I put this question up. I share it as a pre-work thought exercise too before a team meeting. And ideally in that setting, you'd have your most senior leaders around the table that would have thought about what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to us? Or maybe it's just D&I, diversity and inclusion. Maybe you've got the belonging factor, the B in there. Whatever words you're using to describe it, put it up on the board and say, okay, what does that mean to us? And I usually give some examples. I don't like to anchor people to my words to define it. I don't know your culture nearly as well as you do. But as an unbiased facilitator, my role is to get people's appetite wet and to understand what contextually this could mean. So sometimes I'll say it's a brave place to be our full selves. Sometimes I'll say it's a sense of belonging. Sometimes I might mention a deep commitment. That word comes up a lot. Or appreciation of differences. So those are just some sample language, very simple language, but also very emotional language, which I think is really important in the DEI strategy conversation. And then I'll say, who wants to add to that? Who wants to take their perspective and just let it go? Let all voices be heard, zero judgment, like a good brainstorming session. Capture the essence of what everyone has to say. And a good, healthy conversation, honestly, can take 15 to 20 minutes if people have had a chance to process prior. You know the processors on your team, the thinkers. So give people a chance to have digested this, thought about this before, and then come prepared to discuss. I always have a rule that everyone has to participate, even if it is my idea was already shared or I don't have anything, that is still participation. But we want to have a brave space where all voices are heard and invited into the conversation and is inclusive. So having some ground rules is important too. And I'll just share, some of my favorites that have come out of my client work over the course of the summer. I have a client that defined it as, we are intentionally cultivating an environment where differences are celebrated and everyone feels understood, respected, and heard. I really like that. So it's a little aspirational, you'll notice. It's a little bit of who we are now and who we aspire to be, which I think is okay for the what statement. Now, the why statement is a bit of a blend between the human and the business case. So the second question I ask is, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to us now? And I really like the word now, because a lot of my clients have admitted it is important because of what happened to George Floyd. It is important because of what's happening politically right now. It is important because anti-racism is something we're passionate about now. And that's okay. Let's admit why we're coming up with this now. Why, if we haven't been focused on it for the last 20 years, why are we now having the conversation? Be honest about it. And if it's because of the events of the summer, that's actually okay. It's never too late to start on this journey. But let's be transparent about why we started the journey. And so, again, this ideally would have been shared prior. You have your senior leaders around the table. You have your diversity, equity, inclusion experts there to guide the conversation or have an outside facilitator like me. And I, again, would share maybe some nuggets to get the conversation started. We know that diversity, equity, and inclusion contributes to 87% better decision-making, 19% higher revenues, 20 to 36% higher profitability. This is data that comes out of Harvard Business Review, Forbes, McKinsey & Company, and Pew Research Center. So if you want to Google any of those, sometimes I share those case studies as pre-reads as well. But essentially, it's a source of growth. A lot of people tell me they want to mirror their future customers, reflect them better. You want to be representative of the communities we do business with, and we want the innovation that comes along with diversity. So those are just some examples. Again, generate a super healthy list. This exercise takes another 15, 20 minutes, maybe longer, depending on how rich you want your statement to be. And then what I do is take all those bullet points and have people prioritize one or two that they like most. And after the session, craft a statement around it. A why statement is what I call it. And this is probably the piece that's missing most in the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation is why. It's okay to say what it is, but why doesn't matter. And I like this one by one of my clients. Diversity makes us stronger. We grow with a culture of belonging, with safe places to learn and grow, capitalizing on all of our collective strengths. You can see how powerful that is. So that's a statement that could very much live in your, obviously your diversity page of your website, assuming you have one, your people page if you don't, in how you communicate with your clients, email signatures. The list goes on. You want to embed it into every way that you communicate. ideally in very varying places, to meet your employees where they're at and also to meet your customers where they're at. So then the last question I ask in any good diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is the how question. How are we going to show our commitment to this? So we've defined what it is, why it matters to us, how. And this is where everyone's jumping to, right? Everyone wants to jump ahead to the how. Well, we had this all-employee meeting. We did anti-racism training. We got a conscious bias training. We're done. It is not a check-the-box activity. No professional development is. Certainly diversity work is not. It's not a one and done. So resist the urge to do that. Instead, I offer create an intentional roadmap of activities. That could be, even at this juncture in 2020, the balance of 2020, maybe you want to get some planning work done. Maybe you want to get some statement work done, some strategy work done. Maybe you want to lay out the training plan for 2021. The robust set of activities really is the perfect time to be planning for 2021 and thinking about, gosh, do we need to look at pay equity? Have we ever done that before? If not, probably. Not just from a legal protection standpoint, but there is a ton of data that supports pay inequality as a problem. Do we need metrics around this? Do we need goals around this? What action plans are we creating? How are we sharing our story internally and externally about diversity and what we're doing? What needs do our employees have around development and understanding how to be inclusive leaders and how to show up in a diversity conversation that can be quite candid? So, and if you haven't assessed where people's mindset is on diversity, either in your existing employee engagement survey efforts or a separate effort around diversity, it's really good to gather those perceptions as well. Those are just simply some key roadmap activities I recommend. Obviously, I believe strongly education is a huge part of the journey. With my clients, about 80% of the activities are education awareness related. And some of that involves, an external consultant or training company to come in, but a lot of it can be self-led. And I often argue having books available for your employees to talk about, having podcast episodes, TED Talks. There is no shortage of content out there on things like anti-racism, on gender equality. There's several topics that I have on my website at nextpivotpoint.com. You can pull a blog, a podcast episode, and have a good, intelligent conversation about it with some great discussion guides as well. So just know there's stuff out there. It's just curating it, putting it together in an intentional communication plan. I have one client that just built simply an Excel spreadsheet by month. Here are the things that we're going to send out communication-wise. Here are the education activities we're going to do. And it didn't require a ton of work, but it did require intentionality and consistent communication. Those are the two important things with a roadmap. The how piece has to be consistent and has to be intentional. So think about whatever you do, show up and keep showing up again. People actually start to believe you that this is important when you keep showing up. So thank you for showing up for this episode. Hopefully you got some nuggets on how to build your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. If you're in the throes of it or just starting, or if you're wanting to get on the journey, it is never too late to be an ally. I appreciate you. And I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Please, please, please share this episode with your friends, family, community, organization. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I post every day, Julie Kratz, Kratz. Everywhere you can find podcast episodes, you can find this podcast. Every review helps other allies find us. I host this podcast because we are stronger together. We are one.